My mother has always shown a clear favoritism toward my older brother Marvin, a bond I've never been able to understand, but one that has been painfully evident throughout my life. It's as if Marvin held some inexplicable place in her heart, a place that I could never reach. From childhood onward, she made no effort to hide this preference from me. When I was born, just a year after Marvin, my parents made a decision that would shape my early years in ways I couldn't grasp at the time. They chose to send me to live with my grandparents, leaving me there for the first 8 years of my life. I was simply too much for my mother to care for alongside Marvin. My grandparents were told that my mother was struggling with postpartum depression, which made caring for both of us impossible. My father, overwhelmed by his job, was unable to help. There was no argument from my grandparents. They understood the gravity of the situation. I was too young to know that they weren't my biological parents. In their loving, blissful household, I felt secure, cherished, and at peace. But as I grew, things began to shift. I began walking and speaking, and with that, the visits from my real parents started. These visits were always strange, full of warmth but laden with confusion. My parents would show up occasionally, and they would tell me that they were, in fact, my real parents, and that my stay with my grandparents was only temporary. These visits left me torn. On one hand, I was excited to see my parents, to feel their love. But on the other, there was a growing sense of abandonment. My parents would spend 2 or 3 hours with me, playing, talking, making me feel special, only for them to leave again, taking Marvin with them. And all the while, I began to see the truth. I was never the priority. I eventually returned home at the age of 8. I thought I would be happy, that I would feel complete again with my family. But that initial excitement quickly faded as the reality of the situation set in. Things had been so different at my grandparents' house, where I felt wanted and loved. Now, it was a constant struggle for acceptance. One of the first things I realized was that I had to share a room with Marvin. Until then, Marvin had always had his own space, but my parents insisted that we share a room so we could bond. Marvin hated the idea, making it clear every chance he got. If I played too loudly or read the comics my grandparents had bought for me, Marvin would mock me relentlessly. I was a brat. A weirdo. If I decorated my side of the room with posters of my favorite superheroes, he would call me childish. If I came home with a good grade and proudly showed it to my parents, Marvin would roll his eyes and call me the teacher's pet. And when I played the keyboard, a gift from my grandparents, Marvin would tell me how awful I sounded, urging me to give up. Even the little things, how I organized my toys, how I recounted my day, became targets for his ridicule. Nerd. Dork. It didn't matter what I did, it seemed Marvin found something to mock. At my grandparents' house, I had been surrounded by love, acceptance, and security. Now, those feelings had vanished. They were replaced by constant tension and conflict. Marvin seemed to find fault with everything I did, and it eroded the confidence I had once held. Imagine, if you will, your older brother, the one you look up to, mocking you for every small thing. It makes you question yourself. I was too young to recognize it as bullying. I just thought that maybe if I changed, I'd fit in, that Marvin would finally accept me. So, I did. I stopped reading my comic books at home. I played the keyboard only at school, hiding it from Marvin. But no matter how much I tried to change, to mold myself into someone more acceptable to him, it was never enough. Marvin still found new ways to belittle me. As a child, I struggled with a skin condition that left me with pimples, a fact that Marvin used to torment me relentlessly. He called me ugly. He said my face was disgusting. The hurt from those words was so deep that I would retreat to my parents, hoping for their support. But instead of standing up for me, my mother told me to stop crying, to be a man. My father, too, kept his distance, avoiding the issue altogether. My mother's response to my pain was always the same: I needed to stand up to Marvin. But where was the support? Where was the love that a child so desperately needs in moments of vulnerability? As a result, I felt lost, confused, and isolated, yearning for the nurturing care I had known with my grandparents. When my grandparents did visit, they tried to talk to Marvin, to gently address his behavior. But it was always in vain. Marvin ignored them, and I was left to face the turmoil of home life on my own. As I entered my teenage years, the anger inside me began to grow. I remember, as I started to outgrow Marvin in height, the way he would bully me about it. He called me a giant, a slender man, just to get under my skin. But something inside me had shifted. Instead of cowering, I started to fight back. I began calling him names too, teasing him about his height, hiding his things just to frustrate him. It felt empowering to stand up for myself, but it also made the home environment even more hostile. Our battles escalated, becoming more frequent and intense. Neither of us would back down. The true depth of my parents' favoritism came to light one fateful day at my school's annual award ceremony. I had worked tirelessly, pouring my heart and soul into my studies, and I was poised to receive the top award in my class. I wanted my parents there, to feel their pride, their support. But days before the ceremony, my mother informed me that Marvin had a swimming competition scheduled for the same day. Despite the events being hours apart, Marvin insisted on focusing on his preparation. According to my mother, he needed her more. She assured me my dad would be there to support me, but I couldn't shake the sinking feeling in my stomach. Even that small hope was dashed when my father, too, failed to show up, rushing to Marvin's side after a panic attack before his competition. As I walked up to receive my award, I scanned the crowd, but there was no familiar face, no loving parent there to cheer me on. The silence in my heart was deafening. Later that day, when I returned home, I found Marvin celebrating his victory. My parents showered him with praise, his achievement treated as the most significant event of the day. They didn't even apologize for missing my ceremony. No words of comfort. No recognition of my efforts. That moment, when my parents failed to see me, to acknowledge my accomplishments, solidified the painful truth. I had always been in Marvin's shadow, unappreciated, and overlooked. Despite my hard work, my achievements were never enough to earn their true support. And that moment marked a turning point in my understanding of how my parents truly saw me. For years, I stopped asking my parents for help or expecting them to be there for me. I grew tired of relying on them, especially when I achieved something noteworthy, whether in school or sports. No longer did I share my accomplishments with them. The only ones I felt I could talk to, truly, were my grandparents. They cherished even the smallest of my achievements, their words carrying more weight than any praise from my parents could ever hold. When Marvin graduated high school and earned a spot at a prestigious university, my parents threw an extravagant celebration. Pride radiated from them as they flaunted his success, throwing a party in his honor, boasting about his future to anyone who would listen. I joined in, genuinely happy for him, sharing his moment of triumph. A year later, it was my turn. I graduated high school with an acceptance letter to an Ivy League school. Yet, there was no grand celebration in my honor. No praise, no recognition. My grandparents, ever the supporters, wanted to mark the occasion with a small gathering, just close family and a few friends. What started as an intimate affair soon gained traction. More family members and friends wanted to join in to celebrate me. But my parents disapproved. They saw it as excessive, unworthy of such fanfare. They questioned why my grandparents hadn't thrown a similar celebration for Marvin when he graduated. Yes, the party was bigger than Marvin's, but why couldn't I have just one day of acknowledgement without their complaints? My mother argued that Marvin would feel hurt if he found out about it, especially after only receiving a watch from our grandparents when he graduated. That's when my grandfather, visibly upset, stepped in. He reminded her that it was always him and my grandmother who had to support and celebrate me, since my parents never had. He pointed out how they went all out for Marvin but remained indifferent to my accomplishments. My grandmother echoed his words, questioning the double standard in how our successes were celebrated. My parents tried to defend themselves, saying it was tough to balance celebrations for both of us, especially since Marvin was the older child. They claimed their hands were full, too much on their plate to give equal attention to both of us. My mother even tried to justify their lack of support by saying that it didn't mean they didn't love me. That argument felt empty and laughable. Thankfully, my grandfather wasn't having it. He was adamant, being a parent means showing up for both children, not just one. He criticized them for never giving me the same support or enthusiasm they had for Marvin. In the end, my parents had no valid reason to oppose my celebration. So, with my grandparents' encouragement, I had the party I deserved. I invited Marvin, of course, but he refused, saying he was too busy for what he called a silly little party. Years went by, and the favoritism never ceased. Even when we were both in college, it was clear how my parents treated us differently, especially when it came to our significant others. Marvin and his girlfriend were always welcomed with open arms to family gatherings, while I felt increasingly like an outsider, particularly when I started dating Claudia. At Christmas, my parents never failed to invite Marvin and his girlfriend, but when I introduced Claudia to them, suddenly there were concerns about overcrowding at family dinners. The hypocrisy was glaring. Worse yet, they didn't hesitate to criticize Claudia. Despite her successful career and academic achievements, they always found something to pick at. It infuriated me, especially when Marvin's girlfriend, who didn't work and relied on alimony, was never subjected to the same judgment. My mother's comments cut deep. She once openly told me how she wished I'd found a more traditional woman, someone more like a housewife, rather than a career-driven woman like Claudia. She even went as far as suggesting that Claudia wouldn't make a good mother. But I didn't let it faze me. I stood by Claudia because I believed in her, in our future together. Eventually, I stopped attending family dinners and Christmas gatherings altogether, trying to avoid giving my parents any more opportunities to criticize my girlfriend. To be honest, I don't think my absence had any real effect on them. Then came the moment that brings me here, sharing my story. 6 months ago, I proposed to Claudia. She said yes. There was no doubt in my mind. This woman had given me so much love, so much support, and I couldn't imagine my life without her. I wanted my parents to hear the news from me, so I called them to share the joyous occasion. My dad was genuinely happy for me, congratulating me right away. But my mom? She said nothing. Later, she texted me to express her disappointment. She told me she was upset that I hadn't listened to her and gone ahead with the proposal to Claudia. She claimed that, as a woman, she knew better and felt Claudia wasn't right for our family. I was taken aback. I had to ask her if she had any real reasons for her dislike of Claudia, or if it was just rooted in some unfounded prejudice. That's when my mom dropped her bombshell. She said Claudia talked back to her, unlike Marvin's girlfriend, who knew her place. This left me speechless. Claudia, while never a pushover, wasn't disrespectful. Whenever my mom tried to subtly mock her or make disparaging comments about her education, her clothes, or her career, Claudia stood her ground. She wasn't afraid to speak up, and I admired her for it. But to claim she was talking back felt like a misinterpretation. My mother didn't like that Claudia didn't let things slide, and that was the real issue. I told my mom that Claudia had every right to assert herself, especially in the face of my mother's judgment. I even admitted that I wished I were as assertive as Claudia, instead of always swallowing my feelings. My mom shot back, calling her bad news, accusing her of changing me too much. But I ignored her criticisms. I was happy with Claudia, and nothing was going to stop me from planning my wedding with her. 2 months ago, I sent out wedding invitations. Of course, I invited Marvin, even though he hadn't congratulated me. I still extended the olive branch, hoping he'd join me on my special day. But to my surprise, he declined without an explanation. What hurt even more was when my dad called to tell me that while he would attend, my mom had decided not to. At first, I was confused. I thought maybe my mom had some other commitment, but then my dad explained that Marvin had planned an anniversary party for his girlfriend on the same day as my wedding. I couldn't make sense of it. Marvin and his girlfriend had already celebrated their anniversary a few weeks prior, so why hold another party on the day of my wedding? I decided to call Marvin directly, hoping to clarify things. I asked him about the anniversary party, and to my disbelief, he confirmed it. He said he didn't have enough money for a party at first, but now he'd found a venue that fit his budget, and the only available date was the same as my wedding. He wasn't willing to change it, saying his girlfriend's happiness came first. His words stung. He didn't even let me respond before hanging up. I called my mom, hoping for some understanding, but she gave me the same old excuse. She claimed Marvin would feel hurt if she didn't attend his anniversary party, and that since my dad was already coming to the wedding, I shouldn't be so selfish. My heart broke as I told her how much it hurt to feel like I wasn't a priority in our family. She treated me as if I were nothing, an afterthought, inferior compared to my brother. That day, I had reached my limit. With a calm but firm voice, I told her, "You can do whatever you like, but I won't acknowledge you as my parent anymore." Her response? A scoff, as if I were the one being dramatic. "Don't make such a fuss over your wedding," she dismissed me, her words cold. But that was the moment I knew this was no longer just about the wedding. This was about everything, years of hurt, neglect, and the sharp sting of her favoritism towards him. After that confrontation, I made a decision. I severed ties with her. No calls. No messages. No more pretending. My attention shifted entirely to Claudia. The only thing that mattered now was giving her the wedding she deserved, beautiful, joyful, and full of love. The bitterness I felt towards my mom was deep, but I wasn't going to let it ruin the happiness I could still have. At least I had my dad. He kept his promise to me, standing by my side on that unforgettable day. But when the time came for our wedding, the absence of my mom didn't go unnoticed by anyone, least of all, my grandparents. They had seen it coming, even after they'd pleaded with her to attend. Their disappointment was palpable, their hearts heavy with the weight of her choice. She hadn't just missed my wedding, she had missed something deeper, something she would never get back. My grandparents had warned her, emphasized how important it was that she be there, but her absence felt like a deliberate slap. To make matters worse, my brother uploaded pictures of my mom at his anniversary party. There she was, dancing, carefree, drinking as if nothing in the world mattered. It wasn't the act itself, it was the fact that they both flaunted it, parading their disregard for my feelings. Not once had she called me, or even Claudia, to ask how we were or offer congratulations. The silence was deafening. No words. No support. Just a wide chasm of indifference. Then, the storm hit. My grandparents, fed up, confronted my mom. They didn't hold back. They told her, point blank, that they were done with her behavior. They had given her more than enough chances to be a decent mother, but all she ever did was favor Marvin. They were finished. They even threatened to cut her off completely, no inheritance. It would all go to me. The words they spoke were shocking, but I couldn't say I was surprised. They had always been there for me, and now they were taking a stand. When my mom heard this, she knew the game had changed. She called me. Her voice was desperate, pleading for forgiveness. She seemed stunned that missing my wedding had spiraled so far out of control. And then, the real reason came to light. It wasn't about mending our fractured bond. No, it was about money. She lamented that it would be so unfair if I were to inherit their estate instead of her. She begged me to speak with them, to change their minds, to fix things. But I was on my honeymoon. I wasn't going to let her poison my peace, not when I was finally experiencing joy after all the years of hurt. But after we returned from our trip, the calls didn't stop. She texted me every single day, asking for another chance to make things right. She even suggested we have another wedding, just for family, so she could attend. She regretted missing the first one and wanted the opportunity to make it up to me. Her sudden change of heart hit me hard. Could I forgive her? Could I really ignore everything that had happened, the pain she had caused, and the deeper issues it revealed? The thought of planning another wedding just to please her was unbearable. I didn't want to do it. And then, Marvin weighed in. He sent me a text saying that I shouldn't have involved our grandparents in family matters and that Mom was terrified of losing her inheritance. He urged me to give her what she wanted, to stage another wedding, to bring peace back to the family. I had a talk with Claudia about it, and she felt the same. She wasn't going to let my mom manipulate us into giving her what she wanted. We had one wedding, and that was it. Claudia was firm. I needed to stand up to my mom. She had her chance, and now she had to deal with the consequences. Let me clear something up. I don't hate my brother. Even though our parents, especially my mom, have always favored him, I've come to accept that this is just how it is. Over time, I realized that Marvin learned to play the system. He saw how my mom treated us, and he used it to his advantage. But despite that, I've never held grudges. I prefer to move on, to let go of the past and embrace a better future. However, Marvin, he hasn't matured. He's still playing childish games. As for the inheritance, it's true. My grandparents made it clear, it's mine. Not my mom's. Not Marvin's. They've always been closer to me. They raised me. They know I'll take care of them, that I'll honor them in their old age, unlike my mom, who was too self-absorbed to even show up at my wedding. My grandparents see the value in me. They trust me. And that trust has meant everything to me. But it wasn't just my grandparents who were upset with my mom. Other family members were equally disappointed in her for missing my wedding. When she didn't even respond to their concerns, it was clear she was indifferent to what anyone else thought. Only when my grandparents threatened to cut her off did her attitude shift. Now, suddenly, she wanted to make amends. But it was too late. Update, it's official. My grandfather just told me that they've drafted new wills, making me the sole heir and cutting my mom completely out of everything. This was the outcome I expected, but it still hit hard. My grandfather explained that their decision wasn't just about the way my mom treated me. It was about their belief that I would care for them properly in their old age. They trust me to manage their finances responsibly, unlike my mom. I'm touched by their love, even though it stings. It's a stark contrast to the favoritism I've always felt from my own parents. My mom? She's been calling me nonstop, accusing me of blindsiding her. She claims I have no right to inherit anything, as if she's the one who deserves it all. It's almost as if she thinks I'm stealing from her when, in fact, I haven't received anything yet. I suggested she take her concerns up with my grandparents, but that only led to more accusations. She tried to claim that I manipulated my way into their favor. I reminded her that any changes in their will were the result of her actions over the years. Then, in a moment of raw honesty, or spite, she told me something that shattered me. She confessed that I was an accident. That she regretted having me. That she had even considered giving me away because of her struggles with postpartum depression. She said she loved Marvin more because things were always easier with him. Her words cut deeper than anything I had ever heard from her, but somehow, it also gave me a sense of clarity. I no longer had to feel guilty about our broken relationship. I told her I didn't want to continue this cycle of pain and anger. I simply wanted to live my life in peace. And so, I instructed her, no more contact. If she showed up at my door uninvited, I would call the police. After that conversation, I reached out to my dad. He admitted that some of what Mom said about my accidental pregnancy and her postpartum depression was true. But he reassured me that he never regretted having me. He apologized for the pain their favoritism had caused. I'm not sure where our relationship stands, but I've asked for space, and he's respected that. As for Marvin, I wrote him a long text. I told him he could have been a better brother. He could have supported me instead of competing with me. I explained how lonely I felt growing up, and how much I needed his approval. I told him I was done with our relationship and blocked him. Now, I'm focused on the future, on my life with Claudia. She's been my rock, and with her by my side, I feel confident facing whatever challenges come our way. We're building a future together, and nothing will stand in the way of that.